Hello, and welcome to AP Environmental Science. Today we're going to talk about energy and ecosystems. And when we talk about this, we are really talking about how trophic levels are related, what's primary productivity, how do organisms acquire energy, what happens to all the stuff that isn't, right? All of those good questions. But the first thing that we want to do is talk about what energy is, right? There are lots of different forms of energy. You've learned about those in other classes. But basically, energy is anything that has the ability to move matter. Energy does not have mass and it doesn't occupy space, right? In some ways, you can think about it as being sort of a descriptor of the ability to change or the actual changing, right, of something. But there's some things to remember. It can't be created or destroyed. It can change from one form to another, and you can actually measure this motion or this potential. So when we talk about just some examples, still water, right, behind a dam, what kind of energy is that going to have? Kinetic, potential, chemical, or heat? These are all things we'll talk about in the class, by the way, in some form or other. Well, kinetic energy is the energy of something in motion, right? Chemical energy is the energy stored in chemical bonds. Heat energy is when you are increasing the motion of atoms, right? Elements. Potential energy, the water behind a dam has the potential to flow down through the turbines or through the dam, whatever. If we're generating electricity, it's going to be through the turbines. And that potential will become kinetic, right? But when it's just sitting there, it has potential, gravitational potential actually, as opposed to elastic potential. Okay, so what are the laws of thermodynamics? The first law is about change. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, but may be converted from one form to another, which I like to call there are no free lunches. So, the example of the laws of conservation of matter and thermodynamics, because those kind of work in concert with each other. Now remember, the law of conservation of matter is not always true, but in these big instances and most of the situations we talk about, it will be true. There'll be occasionally when it's not. But let's say you burn coal to generate electricity. You're going to get out carbon dioxide, your SOx family, some sort of sulfur, trioxide, dioxide, whatever, then water and some ash. The mass of these should all add up to the mass of the coal. Then, here, this coal has chemical energy stored in the bonds. When you burn it, you release that in the form of light, noise, and heat. And this amount of energy should be equivalent to the amount of energy stored in the coal. Okay, just as a fun side note, when you burn coal, CO2 contributes to global climate change. SO2 and H2O contribute to acid rain, and ash contributes to smog. Now, having said that, we will actually talk about how coal companies deal with these issues because they are well aware that it's a problem and it's something that they do work on. So we'll talk about the pros and the cons and what are the technologies used in mitigating some of this stuff. Okay, so here's your first question. What implication does the law of conservation of matter have for humans? This is your second question. Wow, I'm a crazy person. What implication does the law of conservation of matter have for humans? Disposable goods are not going away when we throw them out. We cannot create energy because it's neither created nor destroyed. As matter is recycled, it loses some of its integrity, so we need to be careful when we dispose of goods. Natural resources are unlimited because they're used and reused by living organisms, or all of these are true. Well, we can't create energy because it's neither created nor destroyed, so that is true, but it doesn't really have any implications. I mean, we're not trying to do that. We're converting energy from one form to another. Matter is recycled, but it's not about losing its integrity. I mean, we want things to be recycled so we can change them, and we want nature to recycle. Natural resources are not unlimited. Just because you use and reuse something doesn't mean that the time scale is going to make it so that you can actually have some sort of constant flow of whatever this is. But it does mean that when we throw something away, it's not just going to go away. And we'll talk about that when we talk about solid waste. Okay, so second law, this is about loss. In any energy conservation, let me try that one more time. In any energy conversion, you're going to end up with less usable energy than what you started with. So I like to call that you can't break even, right? So if you put energy into a system, you're never, mostly, going to get all of that energy back out because some of it is going to be lost to heat, right? Or to whatever. but it'll be a lower quality next time. What implications does the second law of thermodynamics have for biological systems? With each transformation, less available energy is available to do work, so older systems have less energy. A constant supply of energy is necessary for maintenance of biological systems. Systems cannot create energy because it's neither created nor destroyed. Energy is unlimited because it's used and reused by living organisms, or none of these. It is true that as you change energy, there's less available energy, but it doesn't mean that older systems have less energy. It doesn't work that way, right? Systems, again, creating energy or destroying it doesn't matter, right? Energy is not unlimited just because it's not always available, right? Just because something is there doesn't mean it's available, and sometimes it's not there at all. But all systems, biological systems, need a constant supply of energy, and that is what we're going to be talking about in terms of things like food webs. Okay, so when we talk about energy changes in organisms, one of the things we want to talk about is entropy, and you may have talked about this in your chemistry class. But systems are going to spontaneously go in one direction, and that is towards increasing entropy, or lower energy levels, and lower quality, right? So it's lower quality energy, okay? So energy flow in ecosystems, you start out running on solar energy. The plants and the photosynthesizers, right, will be mostly dealing with plants, but you could be dealing with algae, right, like phytoplankton, stuff like that. This runs on solar energy, which is great because it's freely available, it's non-polluting, and it's going to last as long as the sun lasts, which I'm going to tell you is going to be a really long time. So when we talk about capturing this solar energy, and that's what photosynthesizers do, like I said, that is primary production, okay? Capturing that energy and incorporating it into the ecosystem, primary production. Then we want to talk about how that energy that's been captured flows through the ecosystem and with what efficiency. But here's just a reminder about photosynthesis, right? You have CO2 and water coming in. The plant converts that into glucose, releases oxygen, which is how we got that oxygen-rich atmosphere, which we've talked about before. That sugar is eventually stored in the form of starch, and then the plant can do all sorts of things with that and its mineral nutrients, right? And then a consumer eats that. All right, chemical energy. This is just what I said. Photosynthesis, here's the equation. Now, the consumers are going to respire, so they will take those products in, and they will release CO2 and water, and we will talk about that in just a second. So, approximately 99% by weight of Earth's living organisms are going to be green plants. And they fix a certain amount of energy in photosynthesis. This is the gross primary production. That is not what is available to everything above that. What is available will be the net primary production. So there's biomass that's accrued by these plants, but they have to have their own processes that are going to lose energy, and so the actual stored energy available for herbivores, for instance, is not going to be as much as they actually took in, right? The highest primary productivity, there are two places. The winners are phytoplankton in the ocean, and then coming in a close second are trees in the rainforest. So if we change the number of phytoplankton in the ocean, we can actually change the oxygen in the atmosphere and change the amount of energy available to that ecosystem. Same thing with trees in the rainforest. So we'll talk about that when we talk about deforestation. All right, so how can a highly productive ecosystem, I don't know, say like the rainforest, have high total productivity, but it have a low net productivity, right? Rate of secondary productivity is high, the rate of photosynthesis is low, the rate of decomposition is high, the rate of decomposition is low, the rate of secondary productivity is low. Well, think about the rainforest. It has fairly nutrient-poor soil because most of that stuff is locked up in living things. Well, but living things are dying all the time. So that means decomposition is fast. There is a very high rate of decomposition, which allows all of those nutrients and that to become available, that energy to become available in a very short period of time, right? And so that is how you have high rates of decomposition. Okay, chemical energy. Okay, so photosynthesis was, we're back to chemical energy, by the way. Photosynthesis we talked about. Now respiration, this is what I said we'd get back to. This is where you have the consumers taking these products, They break it down to get the energy. Eventually, the goal is to make ATP, which is then used to facilitate all kinds of reactions in your cells. Okay, so here's your next question. A friend is astounded by the fact that one bird called a purple martin can eat millions of mosquitoes and other small flying insects each year. Which of the following would not be involved in your explanation of this to your friend? As a result of the intake of those insects, martins produce tremendous amounts of CO2, which is a contributing factor to the greenhouse effect. Bird flight requires great amounts of metabolic energy, which must be obtained by taking in large amounts of food. Insects are primary consumers and martins are medium-sized secondary consumers. Martins optimize their foraging by feeding in the early evening when the greatest number of small insects are flying, and relying on insects as a source of energy is rather inefficient because so much of the insect's energy goes into making its exoskeleton, which is nearly impossible to digest. Well, we'll start from the bottom because that sounds, interesting. This is true. The birds actually can't digest the exoskeleton, which is the bulk of the mass of the insect, and so they have to eat lots of them, right? They do feed in the early evening when small insects come out and are having a great time. Insects are small primary consumers, many of them. Mosquitoes, definitely. And martins are medium-sized secondary consumers. That's true too. Bird flight is one of the highest energy activities in nature, and so you have to have a lot of food. The whole saying, eat like a bird, that is crazy because birds are voracious. They eat all of the time, yeah? And then, as a result of the intake of those insects, the amount of CO2, respiration is not a contributing factor to global climate change or the greenhouse effect. It's a very small amount in terms of the martins. Now, when you look at the overall situation, obviously, you have some CO2 that's released through respiration, but then it gets locked back up through photosynthesis, and so there's this very nice cycle. Okay, so the answer is 1. That is not an explanation. Okay, so let's talk about the animals. So animals eat some sort of food, right? And they take in oxygen, and they use that oxygen to, basically, they're doing a combustion reaction, and that's what respiration is. And so they get energy out of it. Now, some of that stuff, we've got digestion and absorption here. Some of this stuff is not going to be digested at all. So we've got the waste products, right? We've got some of it that's assimilated into the body, so this is going to be available for the next trophic level. And then we have stuff that's not even dealt with, right? It just passes right on through. So all of this gets split up into these, but only this is available for the next level. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. And what that means, though, the implications of this idea, is that only a small amount of the plants energy is going to be available to the next level. So there has to be lots and lots and lots of this level to do two things. One, supply this level, the herbivores, and have enough left over to reproduce to continue this species line. Yeah. Then this guy, right, is bigger, eats a lot, but only portion of its energy is available to the next level. And so this guy there's going to have to be a lot of them so they can support this bigger guy and have enough to reproduce. And as we know from some of our simulations, bunnies do that really well. And then foxes, there's going to be a fewer number of foxes, fewer numbers than bunnies, because they're bigger. They have to eat more bunnies, right? And so we're going to have less. Then there's a certain percentage of this energy, which is less than this, which is less than that. It's about 10% actually, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you see how this pyramid works, right? So then you have this guy who gets eaten by the apex predator, and there are going to be very few of these because they're very large and they eat lots of things. And you've got a smaller number of individuals going up each level, okay? So the primary level there are the primary producers or the autotrophs, and then everybody else is a consumer or a heterotroph, okay? And this is just what I said, right? So you've got the consumed energy. Some of it's digested, some of it's used by the organism, some of it goes into their tissues. This is what's available to the next level, and that just keeps happening. And so you really can't continue going because you're going to run out of available or useful energy. Okay, so the percentage of usable energy transferred as biomass from one trophic level to another is called energy flow, the limiting factor, biomass, or ecological efficiency. Well, the usable anything is going to be efficiency, how well you can use it. So let's talk a little bit about efficiency as we're going through these ecosystems. Okay, so the obviously we already talked about this percentage. Depending on the situation, it's anywhere between 5 and 20% is what's transferred. So we just call that 10% because that's about the average. So another way of looking at that is just to say that at each step in the food chain, you lose about 90% of the energy, and so that means a small amount is available at each next level. Okay, so why doesn't any wild animal make its living exclusively from eating lions? Lions fight back. The energy required to subdue and kill a lion would be very great. The amount of energy available in the body of a lion is insufficient to match the energy required to kill it. There are relatively few lions than there are gazelles and zebras, or all of these. Well, I'm going to give you a big hint. It would be all of these, right? Lions do fight back, which means there's a lot of energy required to subdue them, and you'd have to expend that to get them. The amount of energy available would not match the amount of energy you had to put in to kill it. Also, you have the risk of getting hurt, and that's bad. And because lions are so huge, they're an apex predator, there are not going to be very many of them. So that's it. That's the top of the food web. Okay, so energy pyramids. This is what you're looking at as a biomass pyramid, right? Or sorry, number of individuals, right? So let's say that you have 1.5 million individual grass, 200,000 mice, right? And you go up from there. All of this will only support one hawk, okay? Now let's do the same thing, number of individuals. This is stable. Now let's do this one, right? What about this one? Wow, this is supporting 2 birds, but you only have 200 trees doing it. This does not make sense in terms of this whole thing that we've been talking about, in that you have to have a larger base of the pyramid. This is a topply over pyramid. But when we start doing this, right, we know that this is not stable based on the shape. But what if we transferred this into biomass instead of individuals? You would find that the biomass in 200 trees is going to be the same as 1.5 million grasses, right? And so now it's all about how much stuff you have available, because this is your primary production, okay? All right, and then this is a terrestrial food web, and you can see that it's not single chains. The food chain is not a helpful thing. A food web is made up of lots of chains. So like here's a chain, here's a chain, here's the chain to decomposers, here's a chain, right? Here's another plant. So you've got really 2 plants here, and then you've got seeds that come from some other plant. But anyway, you can also see, here's the other point, the bear is actually an omnivore because it eats plants and it eats animals. And in this case, you go here, it's a secondary consumer. Here it's a primary consumer. Here it's a secondary consumer. Yeah. And then, of course, the red-tailed hawk is a secondary consumer as well. So you have 2 apex predators here, the bear and the hawk. They are not in competition because they do eat the same things, but they are both generalists. And then here's a marine food web, just so you can see that there's another version there. And then I put this in here so you could see the energy and matter flow for both the detritus food web and then the actual living organisms food web. And you can see that the energy comes from the sun. Some of it's lost as heat. Then you've got material flowing from the plants, right? These guys are the decomposers. They bring it on around, and these guys take it back up, right? So you're going up through the web and then out. Yeah? Okay. So that is it for this one. If you have any questions, please let me know. This is a very important concept in terms of stability of ecosystems. And if you are trying to manage or restore ecosystems, you really have to understand the trophic web. Yeah. So if you have any questions, like I said, ask me in class next time, and I will see you later. Thanks for listening.